Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, in the absence of a prime minister, a Nobel laureate steps in Bangladesh.
And for that, Bangladesh has gotten a second independence. We have to protect this freedom. Otherwise, there is no value in it.
Many are calling it the country's second independence, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
This is the first Gen Z student revolution in the 21st century, which toppled a government, a dictatorial government. And it's an inspiration for students everywhere. I'm Tanvir Chowdhury. I'm the correspondent for Al Jazeera Television in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
So Tanvir, where am I catching you? I hear the busy sounds of Dhaka behind you.
I'm in a northern part of the capital city, Dhaka. It's an area called Gulshan. Our office is right next to a crossroads. So there's a lot of traffic at this time because the business hour just ended.
So everyone's going home. Well, that's a good place to start. And Tanvir, it's very nice to have you on The Take. Welcome back. It's a good place to start because that means life might be back to normal for people. I know it's been a chaotic few weeks. We've been trying to get in touch with you for a few weeks, but in between communication blackouts and you being busy covering these very hectic times, that's been difficult. So what is life like right now? And how have you been?
It's been a pretty hectic coverage. As far as the capital city goes, it is kind of back to normal. There's certain and subtle tension because politically it's still a lot of things are very fluid. The dynamics could change anytime, right? The police are back on work. They're not deployed yet because of the controversial role they played. They're planning to change their uniform symbolically so that people have a different impression about the police. But I think within a week or so, you'll start seeing police force back in the streets. Right now, it's the military, some of the paramilitary people, and the students actually managing quite well the traffic. The students are in the street. They took it upon themselves to actually police the whole neighborhoods, the streets, the traffic management, something they feel like they own this revolution and they have a role to play. They have a responsibility. And that's amazing. I haven't seen anything like that.
That is incredible. Thank you for that description. Well, let's talk about another thing that the student protesters and the student leaders had a role in taking it upon themselves, and that was to call for who they wanted to lead the country in this interim period. Muhammad Yunus was sworn in on August 8th as the head of Bangladesh's interim government. He's the 84-year-old Nobel Peace Prize winner, and his appointment came after weeks of student protests that forced Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign and flee to India, where she remains. Yunus is known to a lot of people as the banker to the poor for his work in microfinance to alleviate poverty. So why did students decide he would be the best person for this job?
Yes, I mean, it's a million-dollar question, but on the other hand, why not? This guy is a global celebrity. Everybody knows him. He has that charisma. And the fact that he brought Nobel Peace Prize for Bangladesh in 2006.
Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his pioneering work in microcredit, making bank loans accessible to poorer citizens, has maintained credibility with Bangladesh's protesters.
Have you ever met Muhammad Yunus?
I met a long time ago. My dad used to know him. My dad was also a professor and is an academic and a scientist. He took me to his office, so I'm going to meet him. Yeah, I said, yeah, I'd love to meet him. This was in the early 90s, right? So simple and humble person. And he encouraged me that you should come back from America, build something here, we'll help you out. And it was absolutely a person like, you don't think like he's a celebrity or he's somebody famous. He's just like a guy who's very respectable, very knowledgeable, and you want to listen to him, right?
Wow.
Now, why did the student particularly select him? I think they felt like he's a neutral guy politically. He's honest. And they felt like that's the kind of person is needed right now to reform the system. We had a very long, since inception of this country, very poor bureaucracy, very corrupt bureaucracy. The election commission, which is supposed to be fully independent, is not. It is basically whoever the political government is in power manipulates them to a point where the election becomes controversial. And these are the things, surprisingly, the student wants to be totally reformed. And it's amazing these young students who are in their 19 years age to 25 to 26 years old actually came up that this is what's needed. And what's best is the general public wants the same thing.
The appointment of 84-year-old Yunus was agreed upon by organizers of the protests, army officials, and Bangladesh's president.
Most people we spoke in the street, whether it's a rickshaw puller, a cab driver, a shopkeeper, people with low wages, fixed income, they mattered that the majority of the population. And they said, look, he's a good choice, we can trust this guy. So there is a widespread support, and the student realized that Professor Yunus was reluctant in the beginning, but the student convinced him, and that eventually he said, okay, if it's good for the nation, and the student made so much sacrifice with blood, and they're so much into this, I will take the role of the leader, of the head of the interim government.
It's so refreshing to hear this, which sounds like a moment of national unity almost. It makes sense why Yunus has described this moment as a second independence for the country. And he is not alone. We've seen these celebrations in the streets from student leaders and former protesters. He's been full of praise for those student leaders, two of whom have actually been involved in his interim government. So it feels like a hopeful moment that you're describing, but I know there's also uncertainty because of reports of political violence.
It was the house of a Hindu advocate, and the 3-story building was completely turned into ashes from kitchen.
So what has been happening on the ground, and why hasn't the transition been completely smooth?
I think to answer that, you need a little bit of context. One of the reasons is because there was so much repression. Any public demonstration would be dealt with very, very repressive way, very heavy-handed way by the police. I mean, I could easily describe it was almost a pseudo-police state. You couldn't talk publicly about Prime Minister and her family or her close people, If somebody heard you, it's almost like, hey, you could be in trouble. So all those frustration was building up over the years that we don't have any rights anymore in this country. So when she actually resigned and left for India, the political opposition and the people's frustration, people who were angry, and the students, among them certain groups took it upon themselves to vandalize public properties, including the Prime Minister's official residence. So there was this frustration built up, and they felt like that went on somebody, But that's only a certain segment of the people who were protested, not the vast majority.
So that's the context. Sheikh Hasina flees the country, but we are still seeing spots of violence. Why is that?
Because there's a vacuum, there's no police, and the government just came in like little less than a week, and certain elements took advantage of that. Many of them took revenge on their old rivalry, the political party that Hasina was leading, right? And many of them happens to be predominantly Hindu. People took revenge on them. And unfortunately, many temples, houses of Hindu population were, burned or vandalized. But so were many more houses of people of our party who were Muslim. Their houses were burned, their properties were ransacked. So it was a random violence. And these are sometimes personal vendetta, sometimes political vendetta, even though everyone was calling out, stop this has to stop. And it has stopped to almost a greater extent. And because there was no police, the military was too busy, managing the capital city and the other parts of the country in a different way. And this was an unfortunate event that took place. And there is still that slight possibilities of that continuing a little longer, because she, the Prime Minister from Delhi, urged people through her son in social media that people should come out in force, show their support on Thursday in the streets, because it is also declared as a national mourning day during her political rule, because the father of the nation was killed on that day in 1975 on 15th August. So there is an expectation on Thursday her supporters and student supporters will come out for a showdown. Students, on the other hand, who are organized now, said that we won't let that allow, because she's a person who killed so many people, 15 years of dictatorship. She doesn't deserve that. It's not the time for our party to come out and face us, because... So there is a possibility of confrontation.
Sheikh Hasina may no longer be the prime minister, but Tanvir says this isn't the last we've seen of her. That's after the break. So, Tanvir, one of the key challenges for this interim government is restoring order. Another huge task, of course, is paving the way for elections to happen. And it's only been almost 2 weeks. So it is still early, but there's already pressure from some corners to hold elections quickly, from the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party all the way to Sheikh Hasina's son, who you mentioned, Shajib Wazid.
It's in their best interest to hold elections, to prepare for elections as soon as possible, to have a return to a legitimate government that has the legitimacy of the people and true authority. Otherwise, it's just going to devolve into chaos.
But then there are others, student leaders, for example, who are saying more reform is needed first. So who's going to win that argument?
After the parliament was dissolved under the constitution, there has to be an election within 90 days, right? So the parliament was dissolved almost 2 weeks ago. So there has to be, under the constitution, election. Now, I did spoke to the Secretary General of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. He said, look, if they need extra time for the election to happen, we have no issues with that. However, Sajid Wazid from Washington has been saying, we want the election and we want India to make this election happen. Why India? Because India is very close to Sheikh Hasina's government and her. They have a lot of influence because of geopolitical reason on this country, which Bangladeshis don't like. They like to be friends with India. They like the cultural ties, the historical ties. But the interference in our national affairs was never liked by Bangladeshis.
Interesting.
There is a strong anti-India sentiment right now in the country, particularly after Sheikh Hasina's rule.
And also,
so again,
I imagine, Tanvir, because Sheikh Hasina is believed to be there, that adds a wrinkle to this.
Yeah, and she was there also after her father's death for almost 5 years she spent in New Delhi, those days, in the 80s. Now, what do the general public think about the election? Do they want everyone you talk in the streets, it's clean the house fast, make the system better. We can wait for political government. We don't want this political as usual type of government anymore. We're tired of that because they're corrupt. We don't want those systems. The students definitely don't. There are new generations, Gen Z. They don't want that. If the political parties put pressure, it will be resisted by the public. Could be 3 months from now, could be 6 months, it could be even a year. It depends on how situation, evolves from now on to next several months, how they're performing. Are they able to control the inflation, the soaring food price, the crime rates, the security? These are some of the challenges. This animosity between political parties, the vendetta, the clash, those has to end. There needs to be some sort of conciliation between everyone. When there's a peaceful environment, maybe down the road when things are better.
That makes sense. Well, I guess the question still remains, though, over these next few months of trying to figure that out, this peace and reconciliation, can that happen if Sheikh Hasina is still looming over the potential elections? Because she's gone, but she is not forgotten. Her son has been speaking on her behalf in interviews.
My mother never wanted to leave her country. Her dream is to retire there. This was going to be her last term. She's 76 years old. And so she just wants to go back home.
And he has said that she will definitely return to Bangladesh when the interim government decides to hold elections. So it sounds like we have not seen the end of her.
Yeah. Well, Sheikh Hasina does have her supporters. She has a lot of supporters, right? She might be in a point of her age that her political life or career might be over, but as a party leader, she's still there. Her father was the father of the nation. That's a symbolic also. All those put together, yeah. Anybody saying that Sheikh Hasina's whole thing is over, it's not over. And she has dynasty. She has her son, her daughter, her sister still there, right? They can take the lead also. But immediately, I think people won't accept her so quickly because she's already facing a murder charge.
A court has filed a murder case against the ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and 6 top officials in her administration. They're accused of responsibility for the deaths of a grocery store owner who was shot dead during student-led protests last month.
So there'll be a lot of charges filed against her because a lot of information are coming out that who were behind all the extrajudicial killing, who were those people giving order. Did she give the blue light to arrest her political opponents, dissidents, people, writers, journalists, military officer, anybody who were dissenting, opposing her, were put into this secret detention. And the worst is many of them are no longer alive. They're dead. They died of extrajudicial killing without trial, without court. They're missing. Once this come out, Hasina will have a significant challenges to deal with these issues in public eye. So yes, she will try and come back. Her party will try and come back. But I don't think not anytime soon, because she's now going to face a lot of rep about the kind of repressive government she ran under a police state.
Yeah. Well, finally, Tanvir, I'd like to get personal if you're willing, because you are a Bangladeshi who's lived not just through the last few weeks, but also the last 15 years of Sheikh Hasina's rule. And you get to talk to people of all walks of life about how they're feeling. How optimistic are you now that Muhammad Yunus is in charge, that this interim government is in place, and that he and the government might be able to bring in some of the change that people in the country are asking for?
Yes, I'm also a Bangladeshi American. I'm a naturalized American. Most significant part of my young life and adult life was in America, So I came back here because my family was here. This is my birth country, So last 15 years, what I saw, it gave me, because I lived abroad, I have a different perspective of looking at things. I'm optimistic. The reason why I feel optimistic is because, as you said, I go to villages, rural areas. I love talking to people, grassroots people, villagers, farmers, fishermen, how they think, what they want for this country. And more, I feel like these people deserve better. They are very optimistic about this new interim government. So am I. I think if they do well, we could go for another year or two with this government. Once the institutional reforms are done, then of course we want democracy. And all the political party, including Sheikh Hasina's party, should come and join the election and let the people decide who should run the country next.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tamara Khandaker, Chloe K. Lee, and Sonia Bhagat, with Amy Walters, Khaled Soltan, Duha Mosaad, Veronique Eshaya, Shraddha Joshi, Hagir Saleh, Manahil Naveed, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.